Jimmy's back. So before we start, we'd really like to know, how did you find out? This is our third iteration of Literary Libations. How did you find out about it?
Well, there's a better way to ask that question. How many people are here because they like Charles Bowden and want to participate in a discussion of Charles Bowden?
Okay.
One guy. So how many? Two people. How many people?
For the wine. I'm here for the wine.
How many people are here because they want to just learn something new about Charles Bowden? Okay. Ooh. And how many people bought their tickets online? Okay, there you go. See?
Wow. You are the pro from
I've done this a while.
You've been in radio a while?
I've been in radio for a while. If you don't know, this of course is Ken Sanders of Ken Sanders Rare Books, one of the most well-known book sellers and book purveyors, I guess, in the entire world, really.
You make it sound purveyor, kind of dirty, Bill.
He's a purveyor. He purveys books of books of all kinds. You could find books here that they would not allow in public schools. Probably most of them. And I'm Bill Allred. I do a radio show called Radio from Hell on X96. Thank you all for coming. We're getting underway here sort of slowly because we're waiting for a few more people to come in, and there's somebody
coming right now.
Come right up front, and you'll get a very warm, loving smile from me, ma'am. I'm going to sit down, and I'll give you one of my patented, loving, warm smiles.
Better not be the sigh, though, because then I'm going to feel...
You're right. I'm just going to give you a warm smile. I won't give you the warm, loving smile. Are you ready? Here we go. You have to... Here, you ready? I'm going to give you one of my... Yeah, you. I've been talking to you this whole time. It's hilarious. It's hilarious. Yes, you.
You talking to me?
What's your name, ma'am?
Barbara.
Hi, Barbara.
No, it's not Barbara.
You've met your match.
I think what I think is interesting is she doesn't want anyone to know she's here. She won't use her real name. Barbara, if that's your name, I'm going to give you one of my patented loving smile or warm smiles. Are you ready?
Oof.
Okay. It was warm. Thank you. Are we set, Jim? Yes. Question
Jimmy?
from the back of the room. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to comment that you guys with your mustaches, you kind of hide your facial expressions underneath the mustache, whereas ladies, we have either the smile, we don't get to how the mustache hides.
That's quite an observation, ma'am. I think that my warm smiles and it comes through whether I have a beard and a mustache or not. Amen. Thank you. She felt it. Thank you.
Speaking for myself, I smile with my eyes. There's no mustache up there.
No.
In fact, I don't even have any eyebrows left, Bill.
No, you don't.
No, they're gone.
They just fell out?
Yeah.
It was COVID, wasn't it?
I guess.
Should we just roll, Jim, here? What do we?
Yeah, let's fire it up.
Do you want to?
Well,
would you like to say something?
You start us off, Jimmy.
I do. Will you be having wine this evening, dear?
Yes, that's fine.
That's fine. Very good. Very good. She brought her own scotch, is what it is.
Barbara? Scotch?
It's Barbara.
Literary and libating anonymously tonight. We don't have her name. Hey, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here at Literary Libations. Without you, we wouldn't be able to do this. We're having it hosted here at the Leonardo Museum. But let's give it up for Ken Sanders of Ken Sanders Rare Books. We also have Bill Allred from X96 Radio from Hell. Going on 35 years, Utah's leading morning show. We have Dawson Dow on controls over here.
Thank you, Jimmy.
My name's Jimmy Santangelo with the Wine Academy of Utah. We'll be doing the libations portion. You know, honestly, I wanted to call this Books and Booze, but they wanted to class it up a little bit. Yeah, it was funnier in rehearsal, boys. I don't know what happened.
But we wanted to class it up, but we still allowed Jimmy to come.
Nah, Nice, nice.
And what rehearsal are you talking about?
Tonight, everyone started. What we like to do is we start you off with a little sparkling wine this evening. Tonight, we have a sparkling wine from Chile. This is the Garnacha and Cabernet Franc grape varietal. Make it that rosé. It's a bubbly. Just something to wash Saturday off the palate, I like to say. We are then going to follow up with another wine, but we'll get into that. This is a Pinot Noir. I guess we'll get into it right now, so this way we don't have to. What a cool label, huh? Everyone's got that little tasting card. This Pinot Noir is from the Willamette Valley in Oregon, and this 100% Pinot Noir from Battle Creek Vineyards, from their own vineyard name, Battle Creek. It's this tiny 110-acre plot of land where they're sourcing all the fruit specifically from that area. It's on a western slope hillside, soaking in all the sun. A lot of minerality. This is a 2017 vintage. You usually don't get an aged Pinot Noir. Usually it's nice and fresh. So this is just about 7-8 years old in your glass. Quite a premium product. And tonight in celebration, and I know, Bill, you're going to read this quote for us. Go ahead.
Jimmy selected this wine based on this quote from Charles Bowden. It's on your card. He says, "I don't trust the answers or the people who give me the answers. I believe in dirt and bone and flowers and fresh pasta and salsa cruda and red wine. I don't believe in white wine. I insist on color."
With that, I have one more glass to pour, and then I'd like to raise a glass to this beautiful Saturday, the author at hand, and to each and every one of you for joining us today. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers. Saved by the bell.
It's interesting to me that a lot of you don't know about Charles Bowden.
It's not to me. I expect it.
You would expect it. But the fact that you're here and you want to know about Charles Bowden, I think is great.
That's interesting to me.
You're about to discover an exceptionally original thinker and writer. Charles Bowden, he was called America's most alarming writer. He was born in 1945 in Joliet, Illinois. Mr. Bowden, Charles Clyde Bowden, died August 30th, 2014. His father was a lawyer who read deeply and was fascinated by the West, moved the family to Tucson, Arizona when Charles was just a boy. Bowden fell in love with his new surroundings. He graduated from the University of Arizona and received a master's degree in American intellectual history from the University of Wisconsin. He completed work toward his doctorate there, but then walked out while defending his dissertation because he was frustrated with what he felt were uninformed questions from his review committee. If you've ever stood before a doctoral committee or a master's degree committee and tried to defend your work, you probably know how he felt. At the time of his death, Charles Bowden was in a relationship with Molly Malloy. In addition to Ms. Malloy, who was a research librarian at New Mexico State University who specializes in border issues, his survivors include a son, Jesse Niwa, from a previous relationship. He had a sister, Margaret Bowden, and a brother, George. He had 2 marriages that ended in divorce. Some of his most well-known books, of the 26 or so that he wrote, are Down by the River, Murder City, Juarez and the Global Economy's New Killing Fields, and Blood Orchid, An Unnatural History of America, which describes environmental destruction and social alienation in the West. We're going to talk about Charles Bowden in a couple of different ways today. First, we're going to talk about his writings on the border, the drug cartels, the murders, and the world's most dangerous city, Juarez, Mexico. And then second, I'd like to look at how Bowden wrote about nature and about the desert. And Ken Sanders, who knew Chuck personally, has something he wants to read you about Charles' writing. This is what you wanted to read? This?
Yeah.
Please do. Now. Did you, shall we wait in silence for a moment?
You follow, Bill? You follow?
I'm wondering if you do. You get a little bubbly in Ken, and it's just, he'll dance with you later on.
You are a bald-faced liar, sir. I knew Chuck for the last 40 years of his life. Took me a long time to understand him. Maybe I never did. But I did learn fairly early on, if Chuck Bowden told you about a person, a place, a book, anything, pay attention. There was a reason he was telling you. He liked to have bolt holes around the country where he could just go and disappear into. Arivaca, Mexico was one of the bolt holes. The swamp down outside of where the formerly the Papago, the Tohono O'odham, is as close as I can come to pronouncing their tribal name. And also in Patagonia, Arizona, Jim Harrison, the late writer, had a place right on the only water source in that whole area. And anyhow, he always had these bolt holes. He added these places, authors. And I learned if Chuck Bowden told me about something, pay attention, listen to it. And his trademark line was always, "Ken, you follow?" So I first met Chuck in 1981. Edward Abbey introduced me to Earth First. We don't have time to talk about that. And in 1983, being very active, in 1981, we dropped a 300-foot plastic crack down the surface of Glen Canyon Dam. The Park Service got a little bent out of shape. So 2 years later, they decided, Bill, to hold a birthday party for Lake Powell, for God's sake. And they were going to have the governors of Utah and Arizona, Matheson and Babbitt, about the last decent governor this state's ever had. And
No, not about. He was the last decent governor the state ever had.
thanks for that correction. And James Watt, the newly minted Ronald Reagan Secretary of the Interior. So I organized a three-way funeral.
I'm glad you said funeral. When you said I organized a three-way, I just went, oh, come on, Ken. Now,
Are you going to let me read my broadside, Bill?
I'm waiting for you to get to it, yeah.
Well, just keep waiting. So we chased James Watt around. We had a pirate ship. We had an airplane. And we even brought our own Earth First protesters. One of them was called Earth Last, with the exclamation point, of course. And the other groups were called Mutants for Watt. My brother had lent me the last 3 days of his Lake Powell houseboat rental, which, although I've been rowing my own boat down the rivers of the West for many decades, don't do it anymore, I'd never actually driven a boat of any kind with a motor in it. And so Howie Woke and I, one of the Earth First founders, picked it up at Waweep, and in the middle of a storm, tried to back this 50-foot houseboat out of the marina and over to Lone Rock Campground. And I just remember Howie at the back of 50 feet in the back of the boat scream, "No, Spurs, turn it the other way." And it's like, how does he make it go the other way? I didn't know. It's not like rowing a boat, Bill.
No, it's not.
It's totally not. No. It's very different.
Have you ever tried to row a houseboat? It's really very difficult.
But somehow we made it, and we had I'm trying to keep this truncated.
You're not doing a really good job of that.
Oh, yes, I am.
Get right into the broadside.
We were at Willie's Water Dog Saloon Bar the night before, and the owner kind of had a crush on one of the women with us, so 3 o'clock in the morning, we're still there, and I've got like 12 shots of whiskey lined up in front of me, and he's got a pound of pot, and he's rolling joints out on the bar counter. Needless to say, I'm getting really close now, Bill.
Okay. I wish I had 12 shots of whiskey in front of me right now.
Just give me a moment. Give me a moment.
Thank you.
And I don't think I'm actually sleeping in a tent, but I'm passed out, and there's a guy yelling at me and kind of kicking me in the side, asking me really, really difficult questions for a hangover at 6 a.m. And that man was Charles Bowden, and that's how I met him. And he had written two books, Killing the Hidden Waters and Street Signs Chicago before that. And in Blue Desert, his third book, there's a chapter on this episode, and you can read about me and my beer bellies spreading over my Moab Red Devil shorts. But in spite of that, we became
I'm glad we don't have anything to eat right now. Oh, great. The food comes just as we picture that.
Should I read the broadside now?
Please, Ken. This is Chuck writing about
what he does for a living.
How to write.
You follow?
Yeah.
You follow?
I think I am.
Okay. This is a speech he wrote down in Tucson that I got his permission to reprint as a broadside. It's called Lies in the Desert, Charles Bowden. That's what I do. I put words down on pieces of paper. I may not be the best person for the job, but frankly, I've never seen the job listed in the classified ads. I kind of made up the job as I went along. I use this place, this desert, as my springboard because here the past is rich, the ground is honest, and the future is as naked and plain as the broken fence we call our border, as naked and plain as the dead rivers, as naked and plain as the butchered desert disappearing under pavement. You can live here and lie. But still, it is not as easy to lie here. Here, lies are more naked. The earth itself rebukes the lies. Here, you can see what is happening. The light is very bright here, and you either look at things clearly or you turn your back and pull the shades. But you can hardly say you don't know what is going on. That is the blessing of this place. And in the end, the duty this place imposes on each and every one of us who live here.
Charles Bowden. By the way, if you during this should be a discussion. If you want to ask questions at any time or something that you're curious about that didn't make sense, like Ken in his boxer shorts standing. But if anything you want to add or ask, I
want to know why he was called alarming, or are you going to...
Well, you'll see why he was called alarming. Yeah, he was also, I think, alternatively called America's most dangerous writer on occasion. Charles Bowden, Ken, you wrote this about Bowden's death. He was 69 years old, and he had been speaking and writing the truth as he saw it for all of those years. A lone voice crying in the wilderness, he was the first American to write about the killings in Juarez and has been relentlessly writing about the drug trade on both sides of the border for some 20 years. You were friends. Where were you, and how did you hear about Charles Bowden's death?
I was shocked to learn it's actually been 11 years ago already. Unlike Edward Abbey, when Edward Abbey died on March 14th, I was in Hong Kong printing my Edward Abbey Western Wilderness calendars. And there
your silly calendar.
You might, Ed, Ken, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? You're not going to keep printing those silly calendars, are you? But no one in the island of Hong Kong knew who the hell Ed Abbey. But unlike Abbey, I was just home, and I think Molly called me. We'd been down there, not
in Tucson.
Not too long before. And Chuck and I that year had done. He came. I was doing an antique roadshow in El Paso, and he came. He drove all the way to El Paso from Las Cruces, not that far, and then drove me all the way back to Patagonia, the bolt hole of Jim and the Harrisons in Arizona, and I spent 4 or 5 days with him there. And then he drove me back to, and Scott Carey at that time did that brilliant interview that we're going to do some of.
So you, when you
I just heard of it, it just,
when his partner Molly Malloy calls you and said Chuck is dead, did you immediately think he'd been shot or killed somehow?
We always assumed for the last 20 years of Chuck Bowden's life that he would be assassinated by the Juarez Drug Cartel and Amado Carrillo Fuentes.
Mm-hmm.
He exposed him. He published. This gentleman has got the actual issue.
Let me preface to your comments about him, the dangerous life he led with this, Ken, if I might. He wrote about dangerous people doing dangerous things. In 2024, Juarez, Mexico had a murder rate of 77.43 per 100,000 people, making it one of the most dangerous cities in the world. And Chuck was there writing about it all the time. The city had over 1,000 homicides the year before. The top 10 most murderous cities in the world, Mexico occupies the first 7 slots. Interestingly enough, Ciudad Juarez is not number 1 anymore. It's dropped down to number 9.
Wow.
In the top 10.
Didn't know that.
All of this fueled by drugs and mainly by Americans' hunger for drugs. And he wrote about it and lived with it, and it was dangerous for him.
Bill, we can't even begin to scratch the surface in these 2 hours of Chuck Bowden's life. Julian Cardona, the shooter, the photographer shooter. I don't mean a Sicario shooter. Sicario is a term for a Mexican assassin. He was Chuck's guide to Juarez. He lived in a concrete bunker apartment where he couldn't even leave his camera. If he left, he had to take his camera equipment with him because otherwise it wasn't there when he got back. And El Pastor, this Juarez man who came to L.A., worked construction, was on a high-rise one day, and a white guy said something racist to him, and he shoved the guy off the top and spent 10, 20 years in prison for manslaughter. He met God in prison. He saw God in prison. He took God back to Juarez because God told him to go to Juarez, and he built an insane asylum outside the city of Juarez, an outdoor insane asylum where he took care of the most worthless, wretched people of all Mexico with no money. And he did this he's still doing it as far as I know.
And who was the Sicario that Chuck Bowden wrote a whole profile of? Who was that, and what did that cost him?
Well, Chuck would never reveal the man's identity. He and Molly made a movie about the Sicario, and Chuck would not release it until he had audio proof that they had so scrambled his voice that no one could ever identify the man. And he just sat there in this chilling documentary telling exactly the work he did in murdering and torturing people. It just... Eventually, Chuck, I'm jumping the shark here, but Chuck died in Molly's house of a heart attack in the middle of the afternoon while he was sleeping. And we all thought, jumping back to a motto here, Bill, after Chuck published that famous photo in GQ that, raise it up, show it. Show everybody.
That's the guy.
Amado Carrillo Fuentes published Chuck's name and home address on the front page of the Juarez newspaper. Chuck drove to Juarez and sat outside the compound chain smoking cigarettes as a fuck you. Amado sent Sicarios up to the hotel bar 5 blocks from Chuck's house in Tucson, shot the place up, killed 2 people. Chuck wasn't there that night. Amado Carrillo Fuentes died in a plastic surgeon's operating table getting a new face. And up until 11 years ago, Chuck Bowden was still walking around.
Bowden described, he wrote about the descriptions that this guy gave him in Murder City. And this is one thing he wrote. And this shows you what a great writer he is, too. So It says a big SUV rolls down the calle. You hop in. The windows are darkly tinted, and the machine prowls the city like a shark with its fanged mouth agape. And oh, it is so sweet when you squeeze the trigger and you feel the burst run free and wild into the night air, see the body crumple and fall like a rag doll, roll on into the black velvet after midnight, and there'll be a party, fine girls and white powder, and people fear you, and the body falls and the blood sprays, and you feel like God, even though you secretly stopped believing in God some time ago. That's how he described the act of killing to Chuck Bowden. He lived a dangerous life. He said while he was living in Tucson, he said, I got messages, threats delivered 2 or 3 times. You never take those seriously, he said to I Want to Know When I Want to Know in 2012. The people who are going to kill you don't send messages. They send bullets. So if you get a message that, hey, we're going to kill you, you don't take that seriously. He says while he was living in Tucson, he said, we had guns in every single room. This is the woman he was living with at the time. Said, we had guns in every single room. He was careful never to let anybody know where he was. The DEA told us that there were 3 contracts on his life. There was a gun under his desk. We even had a gun in the bathroom. That's a tough way to live.
I spent a lot of time in Chuck's various houses over the years with him. I never, ever saw a weapon.
Did you now when you were with him?
Now I also would not get in until the girlfriend who became Mary Martha Miles. I would normally pee outside. I would very reluctantly use his toilet because I was terrified to go into that bathroom because there were so many things growing in it.
The hygiene was not good?
No, that was not a focus of Charles Clyde. No,
I've been in places like that. Yeah.
So, Dreamland, Alice Leora Briggs, she looks like a little old Mormon housewife, and she draws these terrifying visions. This, I don't know what to call this book. Dreamland, The Way Out of Juarez is what Chuck and Alice called it.
These books they're all available here, right?
They're scattered all over the place.
You can look at them and see the pictures.
I'm going to read, you can't see, pick one up, and these are black. It's called graffito. These are completely black artboards, and she scratches out the artwork out of the black. How she does this? Oh, I just happened to turn to this page. Oh, now I can't find it again. Here's an Edward Abbey page.
People can't really see that though.
No, but I'm going to read it.
Oh, okay.
It's a little like a stamp, okay? And it says, "What is truth? I don't know, and I'm sorry I brought it up." Edward, 1927, 1989, Abbey. They were close friends, Chuck and Ed. They when they were in town, they would go to lunch together.
I want to get to that. I want to get to their relationship in just a second.
Okay, let me read this one short thing. Sometimes I hear this chant in my head, the mere beginning of a song that will someday be on everyone's lips. No one is illegal, but we are all criminals. The first line will be chanted by children, the second by adults. Since we all truly are human, and we all truly have human rights, and since we all truly help to kill the planet, the skies, the soils, the seas, the giant fish of the vast deep, we are all guilty, and when some bestial court is finally called to order, we will all be convicted. Amen. The house of death, a fragment for the indictment, the millions moving north through the dust to escape doom. One more fragment, the drugs flowing north like a river of joy. Yes, add that to the indictment. But these are all the little charges dancing around the big charge, planet murder.
All of this fueled by drugs. All of it fueled by drugs and by America's hunger for drugs. And you're going to hear Charles Bowden's voice now.
Yeah, we've got to bring him in.
This is a short little clip, and his voice is incredible. And this is him talking about the drug war, essentially.
Next, we got to stop giving money to the Mexican army so we can kill Mexicans. We have to stop seeing a military solution to an economic problem. Third, legalize drugs. The war on drugs is a failure that kills Mexicans, imprisons Americans, gives tens of billions of dollars per year to murderous scum, terrorizes drug addicts, and creates a police state. Albert Einstein once said that insanity meant, quote, doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. I think he must have been thinking of our drug war.
It's fascinating to me that he could write and write and write. Not only, not all of his books were about this, but the latter portion of his life about all this killing, all the drug wars, all of this stuff. He could write and write and write about it, and yet somehow maintain a sanity. I don't think he ever could see a way out of it except for legalized drugs. That's if we legalize drugs, well, that takes the profit away. Or I don't know, maybe the big drug companies like Merck and they would form their own cartels, and well, they are cartels in a way, aren't they? But
Bill, Chuck got up in the morning before the birds, and he would write 20,000 words before breakfast.
Yeah. Like you said, he wrote at least 6 hours, sometimes more, apparently. One other thing about the danger that he was in, I just saw this quote. A DEA, a drug enforcement agent who knew him, said, if Chuck Bowden never wanted to commit suicide, all he'd have to do is stand on a street corner in Juarez and wait for a half an hour.
You follow?
You follow. He said that to everybody, didn't he?
Oh, yeah.
He'd talk and talk and talk and then say, you follow?
Yeah. Fuck no, Chuck. What the hell are you talking about? A week with nonstop Chuck Bowden, my poor little pea brain would just be exploding. I would have a headache from hell. Oh, my stars and whiskers.
My stars and
whiskers.
Yeah, my
Bill.
stars and whiskers.
You follow?
It's that. Who said that? The Cheshire Cat? No.
Yeah.
Is it the Cheshire Cat?
He's pretty big on my list.
Oh, yeah. So
you're not the only one with a cute smile, Bill.
Ken, you're making me horny. Stop it. So we always like to try and pigeonhole things, categorize them. Chuck Bowden didn't. He said, "I don't want to be called a journalist. I'm not a journalist. I hate that word. It's fucking gutless. It's a fucking gutless lying word for candy asses. I'm a reporter. I go out and I report. I don't keep a fucking journal. I state the truth and I give evidence." So he's not a journalist. What? How do we categorize him? Just as a reporter,
an observer. Now, one curious thing about Chuck, all his writing, he never ever published fiction. He claimed to never read it, but he would argue to the death with you about any novel you could bring up that you'd read. And even though he claimed to never write fiction, I have an unpublished manuscript of Chuck's, whereas Pancho Villa,
wow,
John Reed, and a Mexican saint named Teresita that Luis Urrea wrote about in the beautiful daughter, the hummingbird's daughter. She was this powerful saint in Mexico that the first time she saw the ocean was when the president of Mexico moved her to the coast and imprisoned her. And she's from the inland, and she'd never ever seen. She saw the ocean from the first time from her prison cell.
And John Reed was the American who went to Russia and was
the movie Reds.
The Reds with Warren Beatty. That's John Reed. And so it's a fiction with those three historical characters.
Are drinking in a bar in Mexico. Now, of the three, Pancho Villa, you may not know this, did not drink, nor did Teresita, obviously. Mm-hmm. But John Reed, I a.k.a. Chuck Bowden, did drink.
What do you?
But he maintains he never wrote fiction.
So it's an unpublished manuscript. Is it an unfinished?
No.
What happens with it?
Chuck told me I could publish it, but then Ken, that manuscript I sent you, don't publish it. I need it for something. And now with him gone, Chuck's former long-term roommate, lover, whatever.
She has control of some stuff.
When Chuck left Tucson for Los Alamos, he took with him his laptop computer, his jacket that he always wore, and his pickup truck. He even left his standard beloved poodle Sam and everything he owned in the house in Tucson. And Mary Martha controls everything now. And
have you spoken to her about it?
we spoke one time after Chuck's death, period. I'm not personally ever going to approach that woman again in my life.
Would you like me to do it for you?
No, I wouldn't.
Because she don't scare me. Let's talk about Chuck Bowden as a nature writer. We've talked about the dark side of Chuck Bowden, and
well, so his first three books, I'm going to call them trilogies, even though these are mismatched trilogy. First book, Killing the Hidden Waters, his only truly just no-nonsense book about water usage in the West. And he got it right for the first time since John Wesley Powell in 1878. His second book is Street Signs Chicago, about his time there. It's got an introduction by Studs Terkel.
oh,
And then another, when it was reprinted, they added another foreword by Eduardo Galeano, the beautiful Chilean writer who wrote the Memory of Fire trilogy and also The Open Wound of Latin America and a whole bunch of others. And then he started the desert books that came out of his time in Tucson. The first one I don't have here is Blue Desert. Then there's Mezcal. There's Desierto, Memories of the Future, Red Line. Then he wrote the Blood Orchid trilogy, which is sort of what we're talking about today. An Unnatural History of America, to get into what you want to talk about. The second volume, Blues for Cannibals. And the third volume, Some of the Dead Are Still Breathing.
now so let's categorize these. These first books are pretty much nature books. They're writing about
They're more straight
the environment and talk about this book here, the one with the Heart of Stone.
So then there are the picture books. This was one of the first.
Get closer to the microphone, Ken. I'm sorry.
This is one of his first picture books. Jack Dykinga, photographer. Photographers can't publish picture books unless they get somebody to write the words. So Chuck and I picked him up at the airport. We went to the Greater Escalante country for a week. And after that week, Chuck did his research. And he wrote this book on the Escalante. His name for it was Heart of Stone. The publishers, of course, chose Stone Canyons of the Colorado Plateau. You picked the better name. You would think this man grew up in that country and was a lifelong resident by how deeply he knew. We backpacked. We got lost. We interviewed park rangers and locals and so many others. And he writes this brilliant story of the Mormon Entrada that's known as the Hole in the Rock expedition. But he nails everything as if he's a native.
Yeah, I had not. I thumbed through the book and I started reading. I go, man, this guy did a lot of research for somebody who was only there for a week. There's stuff in there. He talks about the history of the Henry Mountains down there, and and just got. So he was no slouch when it came to writing nature things
And researching.
Yeah, and he was very close to Edward Abbey. Abbey died before Chuck did.
The Red Caddy is his kind of a not really a homage, but an anti-homage to Chuck, to Ed.
Well, what Bowden said about Ed Abbey was there's something called the dead Ed industry, which has made Ed Abbey a hero to many people. But they're all mush-headed, crystal-gazing, safe-sex, tofu-munching souls. I don't care about them. And then he said about Ed Abbey, a friend of his, a writer, was sitting with him in a bar, and they were sitting there talking, and he said, and then I asked Chuck about his late friend, Ed Abbey. And Chuck started to weep and said, "Oh, hell," and got up and left.
I don't bring a lot to the table. I knew him. We were friends. We had a lot of good talk. But there are no big moments, dramatic events, or secret missions. There's no cache of letters. I'd pretty much pitched those as they came in. I was trained up as a historian, but apparently the training never took. I am by nature a person who takes things as they come, and that is how I took him. The only special thing about him to me was our friendship, since I don't make friends with everyone I meet. Now I run into people who are struck that I knew him, and I always tell them it was not a very hard thing to do. He was reasonably polite. He didn't shit on the floor and was well read.
Those are two things, but bear in mind, teach your children. Don't shit on the floor and read books. That's all you need. That's all you need to teach them. But Chuck Bowden loathed being called an environmentalist, even though...
Oh, boy. Or a nature writer.
Or a nature writer. Or, even
Ed
though...
Abbey, too.
God, you read some of the stuff that he's written about water, for instance, and, how cities grow up around water, and then they claim it, and it's all their own. And he wrote this. He said... I once told an editor, take the word environmentalist off the dust jacket of my book. Environmentalism is an upper middle class white movement aimed at absolution and preserving a lifestyle with a Volvo. And then he...
yes, please. Thank you.
He just didn't... He just could not care. Give one shit for environmentalism.
Being a longtime Tucson resident, he, of course, knew and had lunch with Charles Keating, the architect of the savings and loan debacle in the 70s. And he wrote a book about it called Trust Me. And they sent him the pre-jacket before publication, it said, trust me, Charles Keating, and something about the theft of billions of dollars. And Chuck just went ballistic. Don't you dare call him a thief. He played the system. He never broke a single law. And they changed the subtitle to that book to Missing Millions, Not Stolen. Another short story about Chuck's character. Chuck, for the longest time, had the world's worst agent to sell his shit to magazines and to publishers. He knew she was shit. She was terrible. But Chuck was nothing if not loyal to his friends. He's right before Blood Orchid comes out. This is the book that was supposed to really break his reputation. Random House published it, Powerhouse. He's in a meeting with the Suits in New York, big board table. And the guy across the table from him says, lose that worthless agent of yours. We'll give you a $50,000 advance and promote the hell out of this book. Chuck goes over the table, grabs that motherfucker by the throat, pulls him over the table and tells him exactly what they can do with that offer. As Chuck explained it to me later, he said, Ken, if I let them get away with that, they own me. They're going to own me and my books for the rest of my life. I couldn't let that happen. Random House published the book, never sent review copies out, never spent 5 cents promoting it.
This is the book I started reading when I knew we were going to do this, and it's it's magnificent. It's a fever dream of a book.
It's not pleasant.
No, but it's entertaining. I mean, it'll keep you going. He writes in what do we say, first person, almost always writes in first person, and he jumps from scene to scene. It's like a dream. He'll jump from scene to scene and then jump back to where he was, and it goes back. And it sounds confusing, but it isn't. He makes sure that you know where he's going all the time. Sometimes you stop and go, wait a minute. He's talking about Charles Keating here? Wait, I remember that guy. And then he'll explain more about it as it goes along. It's magnificent, and it's almost stream of consciousness in a way.
Yes.
And I got thinking about this style of writing and how, and I've always been a great fan of Hunter S. Thompson, gonzo journalist. This out gonzos anything Hunter S. Thompson ever wrote in his life. And most of this stuff that I've read outdoes, if you want to just think of it as that kind of off-kilter journalism. Well, they hated the word journalism, I know. He was a reporter.
Story there. At the end of near the last 10 years or so of Hunter's life, he had bad case of writer's block. He couldn't finish the book that God knows how much money Random House had advanced him for. This is right before Blood Orchid. They gave Chuck Bowden $50,000, and he went to Woody Creek to write
to help him write
anonymously, ghostwrite.
Oh, I didn't know
Thompson's novel. It's the middle of winter. The drug deal goes bad. Tries to talk Bowden. Look, I'm gonna murder that motherfucking son of a bitch. I need you to come and help me dig a hole to bury him. And Chuck, Hunter, it's the middle of the fucking winter. The ground is frozen. Fuck you. He drove back home to Tucson and gave the $50,000 back to Random House. There's not enough money in the world you could pay me to write that book.
He, Blood Orchid, as we're talking about here, this is a quote that I wrote, or a part of Blood Orchid that I wrote down that I thought was great and give you an idea of what it's like and the style and why I say it out Hunter Thompson by 1,000%. He says, I speak for the mongrel, the mestizo, the half-breed, the bastard, the alley cat, the cur, the hybrid, the mule, the whore, the unforeseen strain that pounds against all the safe and disgusting doors. I speak for vitality, rough edges, torn fences, broken walls, wild rivers, sweat-soaked sheets. Who would want a world left mumbling to itself? A perfect garden with the dreaded outside, the fabled other held at bay, and the neat rows of cultures and genres safe behind some hedgerow. I dread a world that is all Iceland, the people fair, their genealogies stretching back in a dull column for a millennium, their folkways and their mores and lifeways and deathways, all smug and pointless. I speak for graffiti. Pretty damn good. Pretty damn good. He doesn't stop. I mean, as you go through, you will just, as you read his stuff, and I encourage you all now to, go research his articles. He wrote prodigious amounts of stuff for magazines like Esquire and GQ, and his magazine stuff is
Harper's, virtually all, Atlantic, all of them
are just great. It's just great stuff, and it's go.
For GQ, for example, when the fall that Obama was running for president, he wrote a piece that GQ published called "Letter to the Next American President," and he picked 12 things from our culture to expound on, from art to movies to poetry to history, just amazing stuff. And in it, the last sentence, Bill, it goes, and it's called "Letter to the Next American President." And this is what you've inherited, Mr. President: a hollowed out Bible with a gun inside, wrapped in a garter belt.
Eee. Charles Bowden. He said there are only two kinds of writing, true and false. If writing is true, it endures, even if it's badly written. It's fucking brilliant. He should still be around.
11 years. It's.
Let's see, he would be
He was
80? 80? He'd be 80. Thanks. So math is not my strong suit. 69 plus 11. Wait, I got to write it down. Yeah. Any comments or any questions? Yeah.
Where do we find nowadays journalists that are like free thinkers?
Reporters like this?
There's Scott Carrier.
Scott Carrier.
Our friend Scott Carrier.
He's from Salt Lake. He does a podcast now called Home of the Brave.
He just revived it. He killed it for a while.
Yeah,
But
it
it's back.
was off for a while, but it's back. And we're going to play you a little bit of interview in just a second here that Scott Carrier did with Charles Bowden.
Amy Irvine, Craig Childs are great writers.
Mm-hmm.
Mary Sojourner is a great writer.
Yeah, if you look, you'll find a lot of this stuff online now. Some of the Slate has some good writers that do that kind of thing, and so just if you search around, you'll find them. But Charles Bowden was certainly one of a kind. His books, these are considered his classics, and you chime in on that one way or the other. I just wrote down Juarez, The Laboratory of Our Future, Down by the River, Dreamland, The Way Out, and Murder City, Ciudad Juarez and the Global Economy's New Killing.
And Blood Orchid.
And Blood Orchids. And
But
and I didn't realize till today, you say this Blood Orchids is sort of a trilogy?
yeah, but this is the Blood trilogy. Blues for Cannibals. Mm-hmm. And I only had the paperback. Some of the dead are still breathing. Also, there's the posthumous trilogy. I was very suspicious when Chuck died. He left a massive amount of manuscript material. And, we always like to mine dead authors for, Harper Lee. Oh, Jesus Christ, that poor woman.
They shouldn't have dug that up.
Left it at one. So I was very suspicious of this, but these three books.
That was a literary joke, wasn't it? How about that? I made a literary joke.
Bill, I'm so proud of you.
Harper Lee, let's see, Kill a Mockingbird. Yeah, they shouldn't have done anything else but that.
Libation.
Yes.
The University of Texas, where Chuck's papers are, published 3 posthumous books: Sonata, Dakota, Jericho. I was so dubious. I've read them. They're brilliant. They're the most personal books he ever wrote. They're much more about him than anything he ever wrote. And if there's one thing Mary Martha Miles, the executor, ever did good, was to let these 3 books come out. Then there's this book, also UT, America's Most Alarming Writer, that has essays by 30, 40 people in it about their experiences with Chuck and his books. And I have a piece in here too.
I just read it. As a matter of fact, it's quite good.
Well,
quite good.
Thank you, Bill. Coming from you, that means something.
Does it really?
Don't give me that smile. It's not going to work with me, Bill.
What if I put the sigh at the end of it? I thought this was interesting, and I just looking at this picture, and I don't know, some of you can see it. He looks like just such a goofball kid. He looks like a goofball.
And Chuck did not take care of himself, I'm afraid to say. He let his teeth go. He just, oh, good Lord, he did not. He did finally quit smoking, but he
unfiltered Luckies most of his life.
So dealing with the later Charles Bowden. Mm-hmm. Here's the intro to Dakota, The Return of the Future. It has an introduction by Terry Tempest Williams. Those first 10,000 years of my life, I will try to explain how I stumbled to the ground and never got up. I know you didn't ask, but I did. My piece of ground. On a bend, I will see it. A piece of ground off to the side. I will know the feel of this place. The leaves stir slowly on the trees. Dry air smells like dust. Birds dart, and the trails are made by beasts living free. The stars do not complain. They live, explode, die, and send no messages of regret. Sometimes, as the darkness grows, I can hear them, always a low hum, but I never quite catch the melody. I have never belonged. I've cobbled together a life without a clear idea of a career. Money has been a fuel, not an interest. I've never felt aimless, but often careless. The wind seldom blows at this place, and days are almost always sunny. I've never laid eyes on it, but I know it is there. There's never been a moment's doubt about its existence. The place is as solid as rock in my mind. I have never belonged to a place or movement or belief. But still, I look. On a bend, I will see it.
He was only 69 years old when he died. I think it was a sort of a surprise in some ways because he had really cleaned himself up. He'd stopped smoking. He'd cut back on his, not his coffee consumption, but I think he'd cut back on his wine consumption. Mm-hmm. He'd become, in the last few years of his life, and I don't know exactly when it started, going from a guy who would just kind of eat anything to a gourmand chef. He went to a cooking school in Italy and
Cordon Bleu cooking school in Paris.
Learned to cook and enjoyed cooking. Apparently, one thing that he loved to cook was this yellow pepper and potato soup, which I was described in something I was reading. I thought
osso buco.
Osso buco, and he developed. I mean, he'd always been loved nature, but he really got into birding apparently.
Oh Jesus!
And just
at the place in Patagonia, Harrison's place. Some people, they go to visit him there. You sit out in this tiny little courtyard, and Harrison and Bowden had this thing. Harrison's would move out every time it got hot, and Chuck would move in. And he would spend all the hot season just like, he'd have like 50, 100 hummingbird feeders. So you're sitting out there, he's sitting there smoking or drinking wine, and you just have to get used to 500 hummingbirds in your face at every possible second.
I'd love it.
Like it's a little unsettling. But they're not going to hurt you. I mean, 500 of them, they could.
They could.
Oh,
they
could put your eye out.
It's the hummingbird cartel.
Yeah, but oh my God! But they were there to protect Chuck. I'm pretty sure those cartel boys. And at night, the trucks would come. So the Mexicans out having Sunday beer. This is the only wet spot in fucking 100 miles. The cops would come out and the sheriff's department would bust the fucking Mexicans having a drink of beer by the creek so their kids could play in it. Then at night, they're mysteriously absent when all these trucks rumble through carrying the drugs into the country. I don't know where the sheriff's department was then.
One more little quote here from Charles Bowden that caught my attention in Desierto, published in 1991. Desierto. He described a region where, quote, the days tumble together. The sun at noon annoys with light and flattens everything the eye sees into boredom. and where the ground boils with the goings of large ants, and every plant seems to rake the flesh with a lust for blood. That's a writer. We have anything else you want to add, Ken? Or we play this interview that you wanted to play?
I think let's do the interview.
Okay. Any questions or any comments or
anything you guys want to say?
Just
ask.
Yeah.
Sometimes he's been called a historian of the future.
Oof.
What does that mean?
Well, Ken could. I'll give you my answer. You might have a better answer. Probably will. As I read his stuff, he was writing about this in the 90s, and here it is. Same as Talking Heads say, same as it ever was. Same as it ever was. Nothing changes. It does change. I'm sorry. It gets worse. And I guess that's kind of what I would think he meant by that.
The parallel, though, back to Edward Abbey, he's a park ranger in the 1950s, Arches National Monument. Well, here I'd put my chair out and wait for the tourists to come, if any. Ed left that park pulling up survey stakes in Desert Solitaire. He foresaw industrial tourism. For lack of a better word, Charles Bowden foresaw industrial genocide.
It makes it hard to go out and have fun later on, doesn't it? I mean, I was reading something last night, and I don't know, it was Bowden and said if the only thing that's certain is death. Oh no, it was a review of a movie actually. It was a review of a movie called The Monkey, which is out right now, horror movie. But apparently, it's the reviewer said at the end of the review, if the only thing that's certain is death, well, you might as well just dance. There you go. So we've got some dancing going right there. I have the feeling you have your own tune that you dance to a lot. Which I mean as a compliment. It's grim. You read his stuff and it's grim. But it's so beautifully written that you appreciate it for that. But it is awfully grim. I would say if you want to get into Bowden, read some of the grim stuff, but then alternate it with some of his descriptions of. Like, read the thing about the labyrinth and Canyonlands. Read his descriptions of nature, and that's what I would do.
Chuck sought out his whole life edges, the edges of things. He never wanted to be in the center of things. These bolt holes I've mentioned before. Hideouts. Alamos, Mexico, up against the backside of the Sierra Madres, about 400-year colonial silver mining town, about 8 hours south of Tucson. It's not on the coast. Take this little winding road up into the Alamos Mountains, and the road dead ends at the church, and then to these cobblestone streets that go out in these spires. And Chuck spent several years there. I've been there many, many times. Jack DeKinga, the photographer, and I went there. This crazy American named Merv Larson. In the 1960s, Smithsonian Magazine called the Larson Company the Picasso of concrete. And what they meant by that, he was through concrete and construction, he was blowing up zoos and changing them into habitats for the denizens of zoos. Mm-hmm. And he was a $300 million company in the 1960s. So Senor Loco, as he became known in Alamos, down on the barrio, where he took this old hospital ruins. Alamos is this transition zone, which is why Chuck liked it. It's where the Sonoran Desert is ending and the tropics are coming up, and they just are having sex together in the middle of the jungle or the desert. Is it a jungle? It's both.
It's both.
It's a jungle and a desert.
Sure.
It's the only place I've ever seen in my life kapok trees. Before we had our modern life jackets for river runners, they used to pick these pods, seed pods off kapok trees, the old Mae West, old-fashioned life jackets. Never seen that. When you went to Alamos, you ran into Gustavo. Gustavo needed to know you were there, even if you're staying at Senor Loco's hotel. He had taken these burnt-out hospital ruins and built this hotel in the jungle, but he ran out of money, so the whole first floor was done, but the second floor was just concrete and rebar. But the old hospital ruins had turned into a bar. And, oh my God, the adventures I could tell you down there. But
you may be better not. I don't.
He loved these transition zones where the Sonoran Desert species were grown to sizes that I've never seen before in my life, because it was half desert, half tropics. And that's the kind of the borderlands, the frontier lands, the transition. That's where Chuck to be, Bill.
Chuck Bowden, I think it was in Blood Orchid, he wrote about this reporter for a Mexican newspaper who was trying to do his diligence reporting on the drug wars and the cartels, and he kept getting into trouble. He said, you can't report on this or you will be killed. And he finally kowtows to it and stops reporting. His name is Emilio, the reporter. And he stops. He said, okay, I will not report about any of this anymore. I'll report about, there's going to be a party next weekend in the plaza, and everybody should come, and I'll write things like that. He couldn't, the cartels still wouldn't leave him alone. And he had a young son. And he said, I have no other resource but to flee the country, to flee Mexico, and go across the border to America. And he gets his kid in the car, and it's quite a long drive, and they're driving, and he's afraid that they're going to be stopped by the army or by the cartels or by both. And he knows they're after him, but he finally makes it to the border. And as he gets to U.S. Customs, the customs agent says to this guy fleeing certain death with his son, what are you bringing in from Mexico? And he says, I'm afraid I'm bringing in fear. And they put him in jail. And put him in jail. And it's such an awful situation, and it does seem like there's no hope. But if any of you have a solution, like to know. You want to play a little bit of that interview with? We talked earlier about Scott Carrier, who does Home of the Brave. He's from Salt Lake. He's
two books: Running After Antelope and Prisoner of Zion.
If you're a longtime listener of NPR, maybe on This American Life many, many years ago, you heard Scott Carrier and his brother, I believe, doing a piece called "Running After Antelope," where they felt that they could somehow chase down antelope.
Team.
Yeah,
by tag teaming.
By tag team, and they could chase antelope on foot. Didn't work out too well. No. But Scott does a podcast called Home of the Brave. He's written a couple of books, as Ken said, and he interviewed Chuck Bowden a while ago. And this is some of that.
Interview.
Well, I was teaching at a university, and I thought, I'm wasting my life here. And what I thought to myself was, I'm going to go out and write the real history of my time on Earth. I don't mean my autobiography. I'm going to write down all the stuff they say doesn't matter that I think matters. I'm going to create this endless book, like Dickens did with his novels. Only I'm going to do it in what they call nonfiction. It's all real.
When did you think that?
In the 70s. I was teaching in the early 70s at the University of Illinois. I had my ticket punched. I'm the professor.
you know. And I walked out on the contract. And I came back here because I realized the only reason I wasn't living here was because of my family, and that's not a good enough reason to give up a desert. And I reinvented myself because I thought, I'm never going to make it. I'll be dead by 30 unless I write. You know, because I can't live off money. It isn't enough. And what I realized was that I should only go out and make money so I could work. So that's how I planned it. I just make money to keep working. What's money? I got black coffee in my hand, you know. Was this coffee in the cup? Well, I have enough money.
Well,
what I need is time. You know, you have to make money so I wrote the first draft of the book coming out next summer in 42 days. And that's all I did. I went into a room and came out 42 days later with 380 pages. I didn't do anything else, you know. But I had to set aside the money that I could do 42 days without making money, you know, keep the lights on. If I'd had enough, you know, like the second half of the book, the last 80 pages, I wrote in 35 hours because that's all I had. I started Friday afternoon, and sometime Sunday morning I finished it and collapsed. See, my only asset is not that I'm fast, it's that I can just keep doing something. You follow?
Another thing I've heard you say, you told Ann last night, your job is to tell truth to power.
Yeah, well,
what do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean, it's easy to make a living telling the people in control they're right. You know. Look at the other thing in the business is, this is the news business, is you're supposed to defend the weak and attack the powerful. You know. Nobody needs court jesters except, I guess, the people in the court. Look, you have a gift. Life is precious. Eventually you die. And all you're going to have to show for it is your work. Whether you, like the Raymond who made the shelves in the pantry, whether you did a good job or not. Because the check stubs, you know, the money comes and goes.
Well, what about, you saying, talking about moral obligation, writers, or people have moral obligations, what do you mean by that?
I'll make it simple. If you can write, it's a gift. You didn't earn it. You know, if you can paint, it's a gift. If you can compose music, it's a gift. You know, you can study and get better, but it's still a gift. And if you betray a gift, just use it to make money, it goes away. It's a sin, you know, to do that. That you sit, like I do in a city, and what I experience, other people experience, but most of them can't express it. If I can express it and don't, then I'm sinning, because I have the ability to do what they can't do, to say what they feel. And so not to say it, to write advertising jingles instead, is a crime. You know, might as well be dead. Better you were never born.
There you go. You know, the one thing that I take from that mostly is that I've got to make money so I can work. That's that's not the way we think of things, is it? It says I gotta work so I can make money. No, he had to make money so he could continue to work. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? Anything that you would like to add, or ask, or contribute, or
criticize?
Yeah. Yes, you.
Since you knew him, what would you say was his motivation?
Overall, Ken?
Tell the truth. Chuck Bowden wrote about the cracks in the sidewalk. Chuck Bowden wrote about things of interest to him that should be of interest to all of us, but we don't know about them. We don't think about them. And a lot of the reasoning is because they're unpleasant. Right now, we're going through, from my old age vantage point here, unprecedented chaos in the history of the world, and our country is behind it. And I don't know the answers. I think we have to we have to resist this occupation. And as dark a place as people like, particularly of all, we've done 3 writers so far in this series. Chuck's certainly the darkest one yet, but yet there is hope there. There is belief there. Chuck Bowden was a fierce friend of his friends and enemy to his enemies. And he just speaks about things in ways that's hard for most of us to articulate because having that kind of mastery of language, it just, obviously you can tell I love reading Bowden out loud. He's got something to say, and maybe it's not for everyone. His book, The Secret Forest, that's on Alamos that I told you about, it's absolutely brilliant. This Stone Canyons book about the Greater Escalante, and as probably a lot of you in this crowd would already know, under Harold Ickes in the 1930s, there was an Escalante National Park proposal. Mm-hmm. It pretty much would have turned everything from the San Rafael Swell to the Grand Canyon into the Escalante National Park. And World War II came along, uranium came along, and that was the end of that park. Now we have this tiny, tiny little piece of it that presumably is going to become
tinier.
As tiny as somebody's tiny body part.
Hands. They're little tiny hands.
Oh, thank you, Bill.
You're talking about his little tiny hands. Yes.
Orange hands.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering if you guys, I know it's hard to pick a favorite. Do you have some illustrators of books that you really enjoy? Like one illustrator of a book?
Well, obviously for Bowden, it's Alice Leora Briggs. I don't recall a time I never read books, but what really got me hooked when I was really little were the pictures. John R. Neal, the great artist, who all of the Oz books except for The Wizard, which was W.W. Denslow, he's the one that brought those stories to life for me when I was a small child. But by the time I was 12 years old, I was a serious book collector, and I started reading books like The Rubaiyat because of Edmund Dulac of the great Golden Age, British Golden Age of illustrators. I got into Dante and Milton and Poe because of Gustave Doré and Arthur Rackham and Harry Clarke and all the Golden Age, Maxfield Parrish and his Arabian Nights. And I read really great literature in early age because the pictures, that got me hooked.
When I was growing up, it was John Tenniel, who illustrated Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, and Shepard, who illustrated the Winnie the Pooh and House at Pooh Corners, H.R. Shepard or something like that. And one little side note about that, I started going to London with radio work back in the 90s, and we would go to Harrods department store, and oh my God, they had all of the Pooh characters, the Winnie the Pooh characters, stuffed animals, in the manner of Shepard, the original illustrator. And then I went back one year, and I go to Harrods department store, and I go, what? All of these Winnie the Pooh characters are the Disney ones. I don't want this shit. What happened to what in God's name have you done? It just devastated me. I couldn't, and I was an adult. Because I would bring home the stuffed animals for my kids every year, and then I go and there's that roly-poly Pooh from the Disney, and I just go.
That's not the only franchise Disney ruined.
Oh, they've ruined many franchises, I know. So those are the illustrators that from my childhood that I really. It's funny, I was never a comic book kid.
Oh, I was.
Yeah, I never really cared for comic books that much. I'm sort of sorry that I missed it, that it kind of passed me by somehow. I was reading books that were books and comic books, and I found comic books to be too difficult somehow. Really, they were like, I got the picture and then the what? Huh? No, I just want to read the words. Is that really stupid? I guess it is. Yes.
To build off what you're saying, I teach 8th grade English. What do you think Charles's or Chuck's advice would be to the youngsters now? Oh, wow.
Sorry.
Tell your students every morning, whatever you do, don't shit on the sidewalk. I'm sure that'll get you a long way in the educational system.
You left us hanging with your story about the man that went into jail when he went to the border. What happened to his son? What happened to him?
The reporter. The reporter. I mean, he was eventually, as I recall, he was reunited with his son, and I think he ended up being able to stay here in the country. But it was just awful for him to have to do that, you know. But yeah, he did make it. But I don't go into it. Somebody else had one.
Yeah. Well, I wish he'd talk more about his nature writing, especially in the Tucson area. If you
the Teton area?
Tucson.
Oh, Tucson.
Tucson.
I mean, I worked on those mountains one winter.
He actually did one book called Frog Mountain.
That's what I read afterwards. I thought, oh, he was still alive when I was building trails up in the Santa Catalina.
Mezcal covers that ground. Desierto covers that ground. And
it was
Blue Desert.
It was.
And
he
Frog
had
Mountain.
such a relationship, and such a spirit was so open to it, and I learned a lot, and mainly how much I didn't know about the area I was working in. So,
Chuck was, not a Tucson native, he was a Chicago native.
Well, I was from the Midwest.
Well, it's okay. It's okay being from the Midwest.
Rock Island line went right over the river.
Anybody else? Thanks for coming. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. One more quick.
So he had a code he lived by. He had a way of reacting to things, and he went to some dark places. But I understand that personally, he was kind of a funny guy and fun to hang around. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Chuck didn't suffer fools. Well, he didn't put up with nonsense. He wasn't a comedian type, but he totally had a sense of humor. Scott Carey and I went during his cooking phase. So Chuck, Scott and I are coming down to see you. Scott was having neck problems, so he insisted on driving. He had a brand new Toyota truck then. And I won't tell you the whole story because it'd take too long, but every night I would have to call Chuck, and he was cooking also buco for us. And every night we don't show up. Well, today, so we made it. Chuck was bewildered how a drive to Tucson could take 5 days. But in my defense, none of you have ever tried to drive anywhere with Scott Carrier. I'll never do it again, I can guarantee. We met the Cyclops in a bar in Flagstaff. And I am not kidding. This was a fucking Homeric voyage. It didn't take 9 years.
I'm not going to say, what do you mean you met the Cyclops in a bar? Because then the story will take too long.
And Medusa in the same Cyclops and Medusa in the same damn bar the same night.
And then when you got back, you had to clean the stables, and it was just terrible.
No, it took 2 days to clean the mud, the bentonite clay off Scott's brand new truck in the car wash.
I kind of know Scott. I've been around him a little bit. I can Yeah, I don't think I'd ever go on a road trip with Scott Carrier.
Well, you're smarter than I am, clearly.
Hey, thank you all for being here.
We appreciate it so much.
On the 22nd of March, we'll do another one of these, and it's going to be a little later in the day, 3 p.m., and it's Willa Cather.
3 to 5. Willa Cather, one of the greatest writers of the 20th century. She held her own with Fitzgerald and Hemingway and Faulkner and Steinbeck. And no, I didn't know her.
She did. See, now you just killed my joke. I was going to say, and what you don't know is that Ken dated her. But way to go for ruining my joke.
And then,
thanks for coming.
The month after that, we're doing Wendell Berry.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time here to support Literary Libations and Ken Sanders. Let's give another round of applause to our guests tonight. And thank each and every one of you for the support. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your Saturday.
Literary Libations is a presentation of the Let's Go Eat and Drink Show in association with the Wine Academy of Utah, Ken Sanders Rare Books, and the Leonardo Museum at Library Square in Salt Lake City. For more information on the Wine Academy of Utah, it's wineacademyofutah.com. Discover exhibits and programs offered by the Leonardo at theleonardo.org. Ken Sanders Rare Books is an eclectic bookstore located inside the Leonardo Museum and can be found at kensandersbooks.com. And for the Let's Go Eat and Drink Show, search your favorite podcast app. And that about does her. I'm Zach Caton, and as the late Paul Harvey used to say, good day.